Well, I think probably most of you know, but some of you don't, that before I was a pastor at Manchester United Methodist Church, I was a member of this church. And that makes really for great fodder for sermon stories, you know? And I never tell on anyone but me. Never on anyone but me. But I usually start from 1996 forward, because that's the last time I joined. But actually, I was a member of this church before then. I was first a member of this church in 1985 and was here for about a year and a half. And I don't talk about it a whole lot simply because we were here for such a short period of time. And we were here for a short period of time not because I didn't love it here, but because we had to move. But for this morning, there's actually something I want to share with you that happened from that time in my life and with this church. In 1985, I was recently graduated from college, recently married. My husband at that time was offered a job with a big company here in St. Louis, and so we moved from Ames, Iowa to the St. Louis area. It was pretty exciting. It was a different time. Within 6 weeks, I had a job. Within 6 weeks, I had a job as a graphic designer in a small advertising agency. We had an apartment that was in the Manchester area, and so we had our jobs, and we were meeting people in our jobs, but we actually didn't know anyone else in St. Louis. For some reason, graduates of Iowa State University, when they want to go to the big city, they go to Minneapolis. I don't know why. Although this has felt like Minneapolis lately around here. But we moved south. We moved south, and we were glad that we did. But we didn't know anybody, and thought that we needed to find some other ways to get to meet people. And so my husband suggested we join a church. And to be honest, at that time in my life, that would have been the last thing on my radar screen. Truly, a church. Well, I mean, I'd grown up in the Presbyterian church. I'd been baptized and confirmed. We were good, solid Christmas and Easter attenders. I was married in a church because that's what you do, right? But beyond that, it didn't mean a whole lot to me. I didn't understand. It just didn't mean a whole lot to me. But my husband he had grown up United Methodist. He had gone to worship every single Sunday, and he had been in every youth thing that had ever existed in his church. And he really wanted to join a United Methodist church. And I thought, well, I'd grown up with some United Methodist kids, and they weren't too odd. So I thought, okay, I can do that. That would be fine. So actually, this is the first church we visited. It was the first church we visited, and of course, this was not here. But even in '85, this church was an impressive size with membership. The senior pastor at that time was John Ward. He's our pastor emeritus now. And his preaching style, it appealed to my husband, who knew quite a bit, and it appealed to me, who didn't know much. It was very engaging, and so that was nice, so we joined. It didn't take long for a bright young woman like me to figure out that you might meet people in worship, but you don't get to know people in worship. And so I knew if I was going to get to know people here, I was going to have to do something else besides worship, in addition to worship. So even back then, there was a list of stuff that you could sign up for. Now we call them ministries. Back then, they called them committees, and there was one called the Communications Committee. I was a graphic designer. I thought I'll sign up for that because I can actually offer something. I can actually help with that, and I would meet other people in my field. Okay, so I filled out whatever it was, and the leader called me and told me when the next meeting would be, and that's when I started to get nervous. I was 25 years old. I hardly had ever attended church, and now I was on a church committee. I had no idea what that meant. What do Methodists do in church committees? I didn't know. I thought, will it be like one of my meetings at work where we look at the work that needs to be done and we divide it up between the writers and designers, and, that I knew how to do. Or was it going to be churchy? I was really worried about that. What were they going to expect from me? Well, I was courageous, and I went to that first meeting, and I'm so glad I did because it was wonderful. It was a wonderful group of people, 6 to 8 people throughout that year and a half. All very pleasant, all, made me feel welcome. Did some nice work with them, and it was great. It was really one of the best things I did for myself. And then after a year and a half, we were moving. And I knew, we moved to a different part of the county, and I knew that if we ever got back to the West County area, I would want to come back to this church. Part of the reason was, a big part of the reason was, 3 people that were on that committee. The 10 years that I was away from this church, those 3 people that were on this committee that really stood out to me were sort of the representation of Manchester United Methodist Church to me. They became the church. These 3 people, what was different about them? What was different about them? When I would come into those meetings, I would feel welcome, I would feel wanted, I would feel necessary. I didn't want to let them down. I wanted to be a better person. I wanted to learn. You've all known people like this. You've all known people in this church like this, and certainly we meet people outside of the church like this, but I'm focusing on the church right now. There are people in this room that are like that. There is something different about you. The thing is, you probably are very humble and don't know it, but other people see it in you. There is something about you that when you walk into a room, it just sort of validates what's going on in there. You walk into a room and people think, oh, if she's here, yeah, I'm glad I'm here. Oh, if he's here, this is going to be a good class. And I don't mean because they're leading it, just because they're there. They walk into the room and the tone of the room changes. There's more enthusiasm, or it's just different, and you can't put your finger on it. You don't know what it is that's different about them. And I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't because they're loud and boisterous. It isn't because they quote the Bible and tell you what to do. It isn't because they twist your arm and try to get you to do things in church that you don't want to do. Seriously, if those 3 people had been like that, if they'd been arm twisters or trying to pull me into stuff or being holier than thou, I'd have run away from here. I would have run away, and you couldn't have caught me. This was subtle. Ooh, but you know it when you're around it, don't you? You do. You know it when you're around it. So what is it? What is it about those people that make a difference? What is it about those people that make you want to do more than you did to begin with? What is it about those people that make you feel good about yourself and what you're doing? What is it about those people? Well, I think our scripture addresses it. I think our scripture helps us to understand what it is. Jesus is doing the talking in this. And we are in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, okay? At the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, and we didn't hear this today, but it leads into this, Jesus has recognized that his ministry is drawing huge crowds of people, huge crowds of people. And he invites a select group up the hill for the Sermon on the Mount. It says he takes his disciples with him. Now, what does that mean? Is that the 12 that he called originally? Well, sure, it's the 12, but it's more than that. By this time, there were people who had heard him and were following him from place to place. A disciple is a learner, a student, a follower. These were learners, students, followers of Jesus, and their lives were being changed. So along with the 12, all those other disciples were invited up the hill as well. But it was not the huge crowd. It was not the huge crowd because this information was for the disciples. We heard the scripture from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which is the version that we use here. But for fun, I want to read to you just a short part of this out of the Message Bible. It's in contemporary language. Jesus is speaking. Let me tell you why you are here. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? If you've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. He is talking to those who have been following him around, who have been learning everything they can from him, who've been taking in all this knowledge. And what Jesus is saying is, live it out. Let people see what you've learned. Let it change your life. Don't keep it all here. You know, we can be very good about going to Bible study classes and going to Sunday school classes and coming to worship. We need to do that. We need to do that. That knowledge is important. But the most important thing is that we take what we learn and we live it out. That it makes a difference in our lives, that it makes a difference in the way we love God and love neighbor, and it shows when you do that, when you live out what you have learned, when you live out the lessons of Jesus Christ, you change, and not in a big, hairy, obnoxious way. You change in a way that's like salt and light. You're flavorful. You're a kind of bright spark. You walk in and things are just different. Things are just different. You make a difference for Christ in the world. In 1985, if you had asked me, are you a Christian? I would have said, well, sure. And if you'd said, what makes you think so? I would have said, well, I was baptized and I was confirmed. And I belong to Manchester United Methodist Church, and I'm on the communications committee. That ought to do it. Right? And I was a Christian. Yes, indeed I was. Now, if you had asked me, are you a disciple of Jesus Christ? I would have said, what? What is that? No, I wasn't. And that's okay. That's okay. Is the church full of disciples? No. No. But we're heading that direction. We've got this spiritual journey, this path we're on, and we're all over it. We're in all different places all along the way. And that's great. That's wonderful. But no matter where we are on the path, we want to be heading in the direction to become disciples, that we're learning and we're excited and more intentional about living out what we're learning to make a difference. Not just in this church, but outside the walls of this church. Making a difference for Christ in the world. That's the goal. That's the goal. So where are you on this path? What do you think? Wherever you are, it's okay. Where are you on this path? And what are you doing intentionally to move forward?